I call this meeting of the Sharp-Cibolo Universal City Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present, that this meeting has been duly called, and that notice of this meeting has been posted. In accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code Chapter 551, the time is now 6 o'clock. Roll call.
All board members are present.
Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. On the Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks especially to the staff. I know you've had a busy day over the weekend trying to do numbers and prepare and figure out how all the actions of the legislature affect the school district. And members of the public, I see about 3 or 4 of them. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it. Hope you learned a lot. Dr. Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Westbrook. So I think we'll just jump right in, and I'll begin with saying that sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and then you know what you don't know, and you figure out, ultimately, you know what you need to know. So I think we're moving from we don't know what we don't know to emerging right now as we do know what we don't know. And that's actually a step in the right direction, but it's not a step to say we're ready tonight. So I just want to make sure. And I can kind of just begin with that in mind. The reason we posted this the day after the legislative session was over was to have a consideration for the positions that we had put on hold on May the 7th. And I do think we know enough to ask the board to release those positions basically and let us get started. I want to manage expectations. I really think that all we know is that, and I'll jump down to item D on the agenda, the tax ratification election. I'll just lead with that. I think we know enough to know that there's no need for that this year, and there's probably no need for that next year. So I think we did the prudent thing. If you see how the bill was finally passed, the only districts that were going to be able to utilize the tax ratification were those that had it on their agendas before the legislative session. So on Saturday, if this bill would have gone sideways and we would have wound up with not enough money to balance out, that's why that was on this agenda, and that's why it was on the previous agenda. And that was the sole reason, because if that was the only relief valve that was available, we wouldn't have had it if we hadn't already had it on our agenda, if that makes sense. So I'll just go ahead and dispatch of that if everybody's good. I don't think that there's a reason. I think we're going to wind up getting enough funding when this is over with that won't be necessary. Now, this formula, I would argue, is not a Super Bowl victory. I mean, I get why people need to say what they need to say to get reelected and all that. I think it's basically, we punted a lot of the same issues. The good news is maybe they punted it more than one biennium, so maybe this is more than 2 years. But some districts, I don't think it's going to be much more than a 2-year fix. But I do think it kind of pulls, I think it'll pull the TRE discussion. I know it pulls it off for the 1920 budget, and I think we can make it pull it off for the 2021 budget. So I'll just start with that. We can just eliminate item D on here. And I hope that that's enough explanation for everybody to understand why it was on the agenda to begin with. Because if it wasn't on there, we would not have been able to call it if we needed it.
I was going to say, you got a heads up on that a little bit early. That's why we added that to there. And I think it's also in this finance plan that we're going to talk about.
Yes, it is. And I noticed on Texas ISD, for whatever it's worth, last week, a lot of districts that had been discussing it previously had it on their agenda, much like us, because they realized we've got to demonstrate that this has been a discussion before now if this bill goes sideways. So anyway, but we're not going to need it. So Wayne, we might go ahead and pass out the Raise Your Hand Texas documents and just let everybody start. We'll start with that, and we'll follow real closely behind. In fact, let's go ahead and do that TASBO Connect. We'll just go ahead and do it all. just, and we really can do this pretty quickly because I don't want us to feel like tonight that we need to have all of this figured out when there's disagreement amongst the experts about what all this means. And it really was just, do we have enough of a comfort level to release those secondary positions and to release those special ed positions? That was really the bottom line. And then we want to talk about the EPP that we talked about earlier. So we're not going to like go line by line by line, but this raise your hand Texas side by side is a really good document to just summarize things. Now, I'm going to show you how on the very first box there's confusion. The very first row. I'll show you that. But just everybody needs to, I think everybody knows this, but the third column, or the fourth column, but the one that says conference committee report for HB3, that's what passed. So HB3 was the first column, and that we would have, even though it's a little bit less in the basic allotment increase, we would have come out a lot better under that original version, I would argue, just because there were less requirements on it. The Senate plan was a really, that's where things started getting off the tracks and couldn't be funded, and you know, we were looking at some crazy scenarios of having to owe money. That's probably where the TRE conversation started, that if a lot of that got approved, we don't even have enough to balance our budget. So fortunately, that all got compromised out, and we get that far right column. I want to show you on this first line now. So we're going to do this kind of side by side. So we also have the TASBO document, and if you'll, the cover page is. So if you'll flip to it's page 2 of 4, and you see the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I want to illustrate how we've got a lot of questions for the next 30 days. So when you look at the raise your hand Texas, so it says under the conference committee report, increase the current 5,140 basic allotment to 6,160, period. Okay, then the next sentence is requires districts to use 30% of not basic allotment increase, but of revenue gain for compensation increases for full-time employees other than administrators. So we were all just running the basic allotment increase and just doing 30% of them. You know, that's 2.4 million. And if you look over at number 1 on the TASBO document, and again, I'm just trying to illustrate how, like, the first sentence gets us off track. So listen to this, although the language references the basic allotment, the pay increase is not calculated based on the increase to the basic allotment, but rather to all funding changes. So as you know, many more things change than only the basic allotment. We read this to mean you would need to take all of the changes into account when determining the gain you received. Then your pay increase would be 30% of the total gain. And when we read that this afternoon, we don't even know where to begin to calculate all of the revenue gain. I mean, we know where to begin, but we're going to have TASA, TASB, TASBO, ESC 20, ESC 13, all of us are going to have to figure out what that. Now, I think we can, well, let me just pause for a second, because everybody see how we were just going under the basic allotment increase. What's 30% of that? That's the amount that we've got to, we lose that amount. And I still think that's a fair estimate, but I just want to make sure that everybody knows, like, that number of the revenue gain may not be the 7.8 that's on the runs. Did you make the runs? Let's just get it all out on the table. So let's just let everybody look at the district runs also. While those are coming out, so I'm pretty sure that, so just so everybody gets oriented to this, the blue is 2020, which means the 1920 school year. The green is 2021, which means the 2021 school year. That makes sense. And then go down and find us on both of those. These were run by the senator's name. So that's why we're where we are in this list, because we just pulled the alpha list for Donnie Campbell. This is Legislative Budget Board, and this is their final, let me just be real clear, it's their final estimation, but it is an estimation. So if you look on the blue side, the 2020, The gain for us, if you go over to the change in total M&O, was 7,887,000. So see, we thought we were just taking 30% of 7,887,000, and then that's what we would be required, which is like 2.3 million or something like that. That's what we're gonna be required. Then we get the thing from TASBO, and it's like, okay, wait a minute, we've got to figure out what our net gain is before we calculate the rate. So that's one of like a lot of things that we have question marks about. I see this thing going to like the next 10 days, the TASB, SLI, you know, I would assume by the 12th, yeah, by June the 12th, that they're gonna try to have a pretty hard answer. They usually do. You know, with that, every year at that's when they do their best to say, this is what that means. But we're at May the what today, 28th? And so this next 2 weeks, we're just gonna have to wait. TASBO weighed in today, we're gonna have others weigh in tomorrow, and others weigh in the next day, and then we're gonna have to figure out probably by June the 11th, we'll try to have an update. By the June board meeting, we'll have an update. We'll probably need to schedule a workshop in July. Now, I do think for the purposes of tonight's budget discussion, if everybody's comfortable, we'll go ahead and use 7.8 as the basic allotment increase, and then we'll just kind of show you what happens. Is everybody, there's a concept here that I guess is really important. If 7.8 actually goes up, well, so does 30% of 7.8, right? Okay, so I think, you know, it's gonna, those two numbers are gonna slide together. So I think we can go ahead and just like look at the budget. Wayne, if you're ready, I mean, unless, yep.
Conceptual question, make things more complicated, is that 30% gain or increase for the employees that we currently have, or just 30% increase in compensation to employees?
And I think yes, it does, and I think that's another good question.
The whole idea was to increase teacher pay, so I would think it would be towards, you know, employees that are staying, but.
Yeah, and I think this is part of the answer to that. So I would assume we're getting ready for the 1920 school year, so whatever we change is to our scales, and to whoever we hire, we're hiring them at that new rate. That's my best assumption right now.
Well,
No.
and then I look at like the third one down, and it's like, and of that amount, 75% has to go to this, so then that leaves another 20, so then you take that 30%, then you have to go 75% of that, which they did add in counselors, nurses, librarians, because that was a big issue that was going on as well. So I think there's just so many questions still.
Yeah. So one, and just like we just kind of do this there, but in fact, if you want to jot it down, you can jot it down. So Wayne, let's just say the basic allotment is 7,887,000, right?
Right.
Okay, so 30% of that is 2,366,000, right?
Right.
All right, so now that 30%, this is Ms. Dreisbeck's point, 75% of that amount has to go to teachers, counselors, nurses, librarians. 75% of that 30%. With an asterisk.
Yes, that's what I was gonna say.
More here, what's the language?
Prioritizing.
Prioritizing.
Differentiated compensation for classroom teachers with more than 5 years of experience.
And we have no idea what that means. I mean, no one knows what that means. So we don't know if out of that 75%, we have to do some percentage of that percentage of the percentage. Seriously, right? That weights it differently for 0 year, 1 year, 0 year, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year. So 6 years in, so your 7th year in, is that right? So your 7th year in.
6 years.
6 years.
Okay, it depends on if you're saying year 6, because year 6 is actually year 7.
We started by year zero.
Oh, that's
so
right.
why
We do
it's
start
seven.
by years.
Okay, so then we don't know if that we have to differentiate. No one, by the way, we're in good company with that. No one knows what that means about differentiating. No one knows.
So
Anybody?
what does prioritizing mean? how much,
I
an
know.
extra percent?
Yeah, like either
And
check
it's,
first
and it's,
or-
and that sentence starts with a must, and so we look for must, shall, or may, right? Must means shall, but it's before the comma. Because it says you must, blah, 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 then comma with a differentiated, so we don't know if you must, like, is that just a recommendation, or does must, so I say all that to say, I think, and y'all are probably familiar, with getting a legislative intent letter. I think that may be where that one's headed. So like, we've got to wait, get the bill signed, and then we've got to get the legislative intent letter before the July compensation plan. I think he'll probably sign it soon because
Yes.
he knows we're probably gonna have to get a legislative intent on some of this. We've gotta ask them to turn that around in the next 30 days. And then we've gotta go to just contingency plan and then get our legislative intent letters.
Most districts have to get their budget by July 1st.
Yeah.
That's good fast.
So maybe if there's enough of them and they're influential enough, the rest of us will get a quicker legislative intent letter to help those July 1, which may be in the next few days. So, see, it seems like a simple enough question you just asked, and it's even more complicated than, like, one might think at the surface level. So anyway, so I say that to say that's kind of where we are, and we have a lot of questions today.
So 75 of the 30% increase revenue gain goes to full-time teachers, counselors, nurses, librarians, but the other 25% may go to, it says may,
That's right.
be used for increased compensation for the other we're talking about the other full-time district employees?
Which
And-
non-administrators, because
Non-administrators.
the 30% took the administrators out, so you've also got them hanging outside of that 2.3 million. And we did some runs to our own calculations, I'm gonna call them that, our own calculations, and so we think that 75-25 split is right at, is it like 1.8 and 600,000 or something like that?
It's 1.77 and then remaining is 591.
So it would leave enough, and we went ahead and did kind of some back of the napkin calculations, that 600,000 for everyone that's left,
Other than that.
other than administrators, could be around 3% or something like that. Just to say, okay, what is it even, what would it even look like? What-
Payroll taxes, it's 1.5 to 2% kicking into TRS.
Yeah, we've got that also, that's in a TRS bill, and we don't have it right here in front of us, but that is calculated because they did 100% make TRS actuarially. And the state didn't put all that money in, everybody needs to know this. The state put some in, what the teachers are gonna pay to TRS is going to go up, and then what the district contributes is going to go up. It took all of those to make TRS actuarially sound, so that Mr. Pivito could get his 13th check.
13th check, yeah.
And others, may know someone in the room, but
Which
but
they
that
haven't
did
got the
happen.
13 check in.
So that,
15
what the
years.
district has to put into it, is that calculated?
No. So
So
those,
it's just more of
those
a
are just the
confusion.
costs that are born into this, that's
Right.
correct. So now, that really feels a whole lot, so that answers your question.
Yeah, that answered my question. So if 75 of the 30 takes care of the 4 groups, then the 25 of the remaining other 30 takes care of everybody else, except the
Except administrators.
administrators.
So on that-
Theoretically, we only have to take care of administrators for the pay raises.
That's correct, and if you want to jump to this, I'll show you, that's, we're gonna just go through this methodically, and then everybody has it, okay, this colorful, because all we did before now is just kind of show you why we put 7.8 on here. Starting down the middle column, and we are not going to calculate this 2.7 until we have it in our hand.
Right.
Be-
That's
oh,
yes,
Yeah, go ahead.
if I could say that, sorry.
Yep.
So this is a more conservative approach because of what needs to shake out still. So we are taking the run given by the state, or the LBB, and plugging that in. The 2.7 is still kind of out there, but we are not sure about that number. So for
And
the
you're talking,
sake of.
that's
That's
kids?
just growth.
That's the
That's
growth.
just growth, that's
That's
our
right.
kids.
Yes. And just today, the way things were, it's not gonna be included into the conversation tonight.
And on property tax, we're going on this year's rolls. That was in the bill, right? We're not going on.
That's correct.
this year's
So that'll
rolls.
be a
That's a
deduct.
big change,
Right.
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's
Yep.
a good reason to not count the 2.7 until we see what all happens with stuff like that. But I believe we just have to look at this like that doesn't exist until we know it exists. Put the money in our hand and then we know it exists. Now, the 7.8, we have a run that's saying that's what that mathematical calculation of the increase to the basic allotment is gonna yield us, is 7.8. So, we might change this. Well, we almost took the 2.7 off, but then we thought, no, that's not,
A possibility.
it is a possibility, so we left it on there. I just want everyone to see what we moved over to the right was only the 7.8 and not the 2.7. Until we know for sure what that compression of the tax rate and all that, or the current year values. So if everybody's good, Wayne, what are the middle,
So,
purple ones in the middle, very
If
middle?
going down in the middle columns there, the purple, those were positions that were board approved in April 2019 for the total of 2.629. And then tonight, which you'll be hearing later on with Linda, is the consideration for secondary and for special ed positions totaling 1.6. So just in that middle, that's kind of where we put the actions there. And then on the right, it's the running total, starting
Okay,
at the
so walk us
top.
through, start at the
So,
top and do it all.
as we talked about, so only the 7.8 slid across, so there's the House Bill 3 LBB estimate, so the 7.8. So 30% off the top for the compensation for non-admin gets you, that's the 2.3
For both in
there in there. So then now that in the gray is the subtotal remaining of 5.5. And then if you apply what the board approved in April, you see the subtotal remaining now is 2.8. And if the positions tonight were to be approved, that would leave a subtotal remaining of 1.2. With the remaining considerations, the TASB recommendations, number 7 and 8, which are, now this is, I'm sorry for this part, but I'm gonna go a little bit slower here because I gotta differentiate this real quick. So on the remaining considerations, number 1, the TASB recommendations.
Yeah, start.
Oh, sorry, you did have that. That's,
Something wrong there.
number 7 is in letter E in the parentheses, that's an increase to subpay. And number 8 are various pay grade changes across the district
It's just one.
for a total of 193,873. And then the other salary recommendations for 256,127. So we split the TASB recommendations there. Number 3, other staffing across the district. As we've talked about before, these are other defined needs across the district that is from a total list of about 3.5, 3.6 million total. We're only putting that $1 million number in there now. So basically less than a third of the needs defined by the district. And then number 4, as Mr. Westbrook was talking about earlier, there's the number for an estimated admin pay scale adjustment of 2% for 311. So out of the remaining considerations, the total of those 4 are, in the best calculations available, 1.76 and change there. So you can kind of see where we are with the total, with the subtotal remaining above at 1.29, and then with the remaining considerations of 1.7.
Just so some people that may not have been here understand, the purple, I mean, we all were here, but I just want to say purple is because of growth. That's why those were approved, and classroom sizes and meeting those for elementary. We had, so down at the bottom, the secondary, which I'm going to talk about, that is also growth.
Yes.
Based
Okay,
on the
you-
projected numbers.
That's a really good point. Just to be really clear, this doesn't change our student to teacher ratio.
No.
It just maintains our student to teacher ratio.
And just another clarification there, thank you for reminding me. On the purple, the first line, it says 18-19 special ed. Well, one might be wondering, why is that even in here? That was a budget amendment that was done, and now we are absorbing that into this budget. So it's also being expensed or put into there as well. So we're assuming that inside the budget as well.
So the board approved it back in April 2019. Had we had the worst case scenario and we received nothing, where would the 2.69 have come from?
Yeah,
Well,
we would have squeaked it by with a
squeaked
balanced
from the-
budget and nothing. That last scenario just showed nothing.
And that's why we held off on secondary,
That's
right?
exactly right. That's exactly right.
At that time, Mr. Westbrook, we were using that 2.7 at the top there in gray in the middle, and we were holding that. But then with everything that was shaken out, yes, sir.
And so if you wanted, that's why we kept TRE on there.
Yes, sir.
There's either gonna have to be deficit budget, TRE, or program changes. I mean, those are the only three ways. Those were the only three ways. I think we got enough out of this, we won't have to consider that.
Then can I ask how y'all come up with the substitute number? I mean, is it just based on what it was last year and then you run it and know that number, that placeholder?
Yes, we looked at the costs that we set per day, and then for those Monday, Fridays to be increased as well. And then we looked at what we currently use this year and just increased it to that.
And that, does everybody see that those 7 and 8, we're having the board look at them separately from the other ones? I just want to make sure everybody knows that. It's not, we believe that recommendations 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are important, but if those individuals are going to get somewhere between a 4 and a 5% pay increase, it may not be necessary to, on top of that, make those stipend adjustments, if that makes sense.
I'm curious with the full day pre-kindergarten requirement, is that going to change our kindergarten numbers?
Well, that's one of the many questions that are in on our list. I think we will be able to ask for a variance due to space in a district like ours. We'll be able to ask for a variance because of space constriction. I don't know how long we can ask for that.
Right.
7 years?
But yes, it could.
6 years or 7 years?
Yeah.
Up to 6 years.
So we may or we may not be considering that. We don't know. It kind of depends on where all this shakes out. And I would go back to where, I think a month ago, what we said is true today, that we kind of minimally get ourselves corrected. We just sit and wait till we get the answer to all those questions before, and so let's just say we think we're gonna wind up with $3 or $4 million. I would say don't sink those in recurring costs. Buy a chunk out of EPP and then let's figure it out for 2021 and beyond. And I don't know if we can do this. I don't think we can, but I wanna try. We're considering, language in the compensation plan that, says that if this, because one of our biggest fears is that this gets passed this session, there's an election coming up in 2020, and then pull the plug in 2021. Okay, that's worst case scenario, I get it. But, we want to try to, if that happens to us, we want to do our best to make sure that we have the compensation plan approved in a way that we can adjust back if the state pulls funding back. We're going to try. I don't mind saying that. We're just going to try. I don't think we can, but because we're all fearful of the same thing, that you get reelected and the money flows and then you just pull it back and put it on the school districts to figure it out. It's happened before. That's the only reason we're thinking it might happen again. I think those are the big points tonight.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, you got the subtotal of 1.291 million, you got total line 124, 1.761 million. That's still a deficit of 469, right?
If we were to do all of that, yes, sir.
Right.
That's why the TBD I left out there, because that is depending upon which way the district goes from here.
Now, remember the just remember the growth in students, and that's,
That's not known at this point.
we don't know, so that's why we're not showing it hard on the right, because we don't know for sure, but just, that's still sitting there, that, we've gotta get the answer to that question.
Have we calculated the 97 cents local?
That is what this run did, I mean, that's, theoretically, that's what they provided for us.
We don't know for growth or property tax.
No, that's what we've gotta wait, and make sure that shakes out and settles out.
We actually put a request out and they said not at this time, please.
Yeah, we may be approving the compensation plan in August, as hard as that is, but we may not have, we've done it before, but we may not have enough answers to all these questions. And so when you're July, people, you just have to go retroactive, and we can do that, but this is gonna be a really complicated calculation. Now, having said that, I think there's enough here to do the secondary teachers and the sped teachers. Linda, the last time we met, there was a question about how many assessments, or Ms. Williams shared how many assessments were outstanding, so how many additional kids qualified?
From the beginning of August to end of April, there's an additional 319 students who are identified as special education.
Okay, so
New
then
services.
when you look at SPED, 18-19 SPED, Part 1, SPED, Part 2, and then you look at that number, what do you see?
When I look at that, that's an additional between what we hired, what we approved in December and hired this spring, plus the April, plus what we're asking for this evening for a recommendation on. It'd be 39 additional special education teachers. However, when you divide that by 319 students, that's about a class ratio of 8. And when you consider special education and look at the rooms, like your self-contained rooms, your bridge students, your ALE, typically those rooms are staffed, with 6 or fewer kids in them, just because of the needs of the students. And then when you're staffing for support classrooms, you have to also look at the ratio of gen ed students to special ed, so that you're not putting too many in one room. So really, when I looked at it that way, I think it really made sense that we're asking for the right amount.
And I would argue that starting at that 18-19 one, we were playing a little catch-up too.
We
had-
probably.
So, and that even makes your comfort level even more comfortable, I think, because you had, some of that was catch-up. Some of that first round was catch-up.
Yeah, I do believe so.
Okay, so I know you look at that 39, but what we're saying is that's kind of the cost of doing business right now. And I don't know if y'all saw in HB3, they're gonna do a study on special education costs, because all of us are saying the same thing. This increase is gonna get eaten up with special education costs that the state and the federal government aren't funding. And so that's why they're gonna do the study. I'm just glad to stop drinking coffee for 20 hours a day. I'm gonna limit it a little bit. I'm glad the session is over, and I'm glad there's not a special session. That's the upside. But we still have a lot to answer questions. Now, there's enough here for us to feel comfortable to approve those positions for secondary and for special ed.
Is any of this affected by the property cap, tax cap, or anything?
Yeah, I think all of it is, now they wound up just doing the compression and then the current year values. That's how they got their tax savings, if you will, on this. And the compression, it's to 97 cents.
Which is what he was talking about.
Yeah, so from $1.04 to 97 cents. That's what everybody's gonna feel that. But that's calculated in this run. What we don't know is what Ed was referring to on the current year value. We don't know exactly how that's gonna impact us this year. Because that's on the long list of questions, TBD.
So where does this all end up 2 years from now? Is there still new money, or are we kind of,
Well, what we,
two-year infusion and that's
yeah,
it?
we were talking earlier, this is just Greg Gibson's speculation, but I think there's a lot in here, if you read the language, that I think they banked a lot on that new play in the Permian Basin. And if that doesn't happen, there are trigger mechanisms to pull all this back. So it just says by September 2021 or whatever was, those trigger mechanisms are like, okay, we can't afford this, and you pull it all back. And that's, so I think that's I think that they built the budget on like the line of that Permian Basin play coming in full force. And so after the election, during the next biennium, they'll pull back things potentially, and that does not reflect that is Greg Gibson's opinion, not the viewpoint of SCUCISD.
Because they really couldn't put the burden on the local taxpayer, because now you're capped at how much you can raise
Yeah.
the tax rate anyway.
Yeah, now the only upside to what they did with pushing it back to the local taxpayers, now they made, you know how previous discussion with the TRE, it was 2 golden pennies? Well, now that's 4. And that's pretty important on your relief valve scenario of 3 years from now, 4 years from now. Because we were gonna be able to raise nearly $5 million with just 2 pennies, that's the golden pennies. But now you can get 4 of those. So, you're gonna be, the district will be able to generate $12, $13, $14 million with 4 pennies, if everything kind of stays the same. But you've gotta do a TRE to get that. But they did allow that to go back out to 4 pennies. So that's probably there, if the Permian Basin doesn't play, we've got a relief valve in there for these districts to go get those 2 more golden pennies, and then we can buy it off for another 2 years, or another 2 years after that. That's just my thought.
And they're not, the value is not based on Austin yield anymore. is it?
That's correct. See, that helped the
They've
chapter
got some
41.
formula for what that particular school district has done.
Yeah, whereas we did not immediately benefit from that change, what it put the line of what used to be called Chapter 41 off several years for us. So like East Central got a letter that they're about to go into recapture. Northeast got a letter, you are in recapture, you're gonna owe money next year. But just so y'all know, I mean, that line was just getting closer and closer and closer, but it pushed it off for us. So I got it put away from us for a while.
I don't know if everybody else got this, but I got a copy of the fiscal note from the legislative budget board. And it actually has in here that the yield of 31.95 per penny of gold and a penny 49.86, 49.28. This is 61.60 times 20 divided by 100. So that's significant. That's a huge increase in that per penny for total pennies. That's what that's.
Okay. Well, we can do this all night. So, I don't know, I mean, I think y'all know what we know. I mean, I really do.
So just quick question, I don't know who this goes to, before the school board goals for early childhood literacy and post-secondary readiness. Who's in charge, who's gonna be in charge of that one?
You,
Yeah, I, on ones like that, I think that June the 12th, if it has to be at SLI, that's why that's really, really important, because they'll know by then.
But it says requires local school boards to develop and post online.
Right.
So that's a mandate, right?
Yes, it is.
Usually mandates are due by beginning of the school year, September 1.
If you look at our priorities, we have a goal in there right now based on our literacy in regards to reading. We have a goal that's established there.
It's true.
In our priority one of our goals has to do with NWE maps, and it's K through to reading.
Longer than, which we have assumed that meets the letter of that.
Yeah, I don't know how they define and quantify our goals. I mean, I do know, but
And ours is that.
Yeah, we've got a SMART goal. Well, I can't tell you Commissioner Morath, the SMART goal is a SMART goal for him, so he would look at ours and say, yeah, that's a SMART goal.
I have a quick question on that 515, the current law 88. That's underrated, those allowances, or do not count those because, or look at those because they're all interlocked.
Well, so you're looking at,
I'm looking at the 515 where it just gives a basic number of change in total annual revenue for current law 88. That's an average daily, and so what about water?
yeah, so I think in order to get it as clean and clear as possible, they have to show it this way, and then part of what we're waiting on now is that there are weights in this, right? There are
Yeah,
weight
that's what I'm
changes.
thinking.
And so we don't, and maybe that, and I think that's part of what that HASBO thing that is saying you gotta wait until you know what your total gain is. Because when all the weights are applied, it may be more than what you're seeing on this
Right.
run. And you owe 30% of whatever that number
Sure, there's
is.
lots of weighted things in there.
That's right.
And that's why nothing's adding up in my head.
That's probably correct, because we're waiting on what those weights do, which includes this fast growth school allotment weight of .04, but we don't know if we're in the top quartile of the state right now, because it's based on the last 3 years of growth, which I would argue should be based on the last 10 years, because you have to look at a decade of growth, because it does these peaks and valleys. And so we don't know if we're gonna get that either. That's another example of maybe we get it, maybe we don't. If we get it, then we have to calculate that in our total gain, and then do 30% of whatever the total bill is.
If we get it from our different info funds? Okay.
No,
Oh, that, I know.
yeah.
She's
So, I
got
mean,
a good
that's,
job in there.
those are the things that I would think that our number would go up, not down. You know, once the weights are applied, but remember the 30% is gonna go up too. So you're gonna whack 30% off of whatever that gain is. But said differently, the sped teachers and the secondary teachers and nothing else until we know the answers to all those questions, is kind of where we are.
Has anybody, I know you wanted to keep it there, but the spending requirements, has anybody read that, or can you?
What?
The 55% compensatory education allowance?
Yeah, that'll be
You'll-
back
that'll be next.
to the weights, yeah, and deciding. I think some of the bad parts of that got removed, but we don't know for sure yet. Yeah, I don't think we're gonna hurt or help a lot on things like that. We're just gonna need to know exactly what the number is. So on the agenda, so that just covers the legislative update and the budget year update. We have, well, you wanna talk EPP or go ahead and take the action on the other thing and then talk EPP? We wanna take care of that tan box first, I guess.
There wasn't anything in there about increased funding for facilities or anything like that?
NEPA, the new instructional facility allotment, they raise it to $1,000 or something per kid. So that's the year after you open a brand new building, instead of it being $250 a kid, they'll raise it to $1,000 a kid. So you get that much money on the year you open up the building, to just help you with furniture, fixture, what's
Right, we don't have anything else
FF&E.
anytime soon.
We don't have, yeah.
We're not building a building anytime
Right.
soon.
So we missed the road part.
Yeah.
It says here the bill will increase the maximum amount appropriated to new instruction facilities allotment to be 100 million per year, so.
Can that go-
have that.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
not
it goes,
that fast.
yeah. So they just, so we're not gonna get much on that.
So, figure it out from there.
The only thing, and we'll try to find out quickly if we're one of the top 25% of those growth districts. I don't know, the way they said 3 years, I don't know. They said 10 years, I think we might have been in it, I don't know about the last 3.
Can we, according to want to do the EPP first? Because we're asking for public feedback, and that'll give them an opportunity to discuss public feedback on EPP.
Yeah, we can even stop now and see if there's public feedback on the legislative update, and then we can go to EPP. You want to do it that way, and that way it's not all.
Dr. Patrisky, you have a preference one way or the other? I mean, you think you might have questions on the EPP?
No.
No? We can have public feedback now.
Yeah, so any feedback or questions on the legislative update?
You said June 12th, what is that?
Yeah, the Texas Association of School Boards does their summer leadership SLI every year. And they're supposed to do a legislative debrief as part of that.
Now, I read the governor has until June 16th
Correct.
to sign what's come before.
Correct.
Is there anything that you have heard that he may not?
That's a really good question. And I believe that you probably saw some things, like he's in lockstep with what's going on, you know. So what that means is he knows exactly what's in the bill, his staff does. So the answer to your question is probably no, he's gonna sign it all because he was involved at every step of the way. For example, HB3, where did they do the press conference? In his backyard. Okay, so but that previous sessions, that's been an issue. Like his staff feels like they were out of the loop and they hadn't read the bill, and maybe we sign it, maybe we don't sign it, but I don't see that being this session. I think the big three, you know, we've heard that over and over.
I was amazed at the lockstep manner
Yep.
in which the votes were counting. I've never seen anything
Yeah,
like that
so
before.
so I would think the chances of that happening are much less than in the past.
And the big three, the press conference emphasis from all three of them was, and I addressed this at the last school board, about support for veteran teachers. Each one of those big three, kept bringing that up, veteran teachers. And that was the first time I had seen information being channeled to elected officials when the $5,000 pay increase, because that was not defined exactly what teachers were that, and the information that was going to elected officials was veteran teachers, that there should be an emphasis on veteran teacher
That made it-
increases as opposed to when they mentioned at the
Yeah.
press conference about those with more than 5 years.
It made it to the language of the bill.
Yes, it did.
Yep.
Just keep on that. I do have a question on one of the handouts here, speaking of that, because that is another thing that was mentioned in the language was non-administrative fees. But yet on remaining consideration on the sheet right here,
Yes.
you do have number 4, SCUC administrative pay scale adjustment 2%.
Everything in that orange box are the things that are left over, that can happen or not happen depending on where we are at the end of the summer. Is that one way to say it? That everything is down in that bottom right-hand corner.
Okay, well, like I said, elected officials were just kept mentioning when they were talking about the pay increases, focusing on the 4, where it turned out to be the 4 categories.
Yeah, you
And
know-
with emphasis on veteran teachers
But
they
I
also
also
kept
think that
mentioning
they,
non-administrative.
and
Yeah,
they
but-
gave that to them, that's why they put that step, that's why they said 75% has to go to them. But as a school board, we have discretionary because of local community and feedback from there. So we can spend that other 30% for, I think bus drivers and custodians and everybody else should get a pay raise as well. And then if we want to dip into somewhere else and give admin as well, we have that.
Right.
So I
It's
think
just
that
not-
local level, they made it
Yes,
very clear.
I saw that also, but again, I think this is one of the things why they really focused in.
I agree
on
with you, and
veteran
that's why they
teachers,
put- they
and
wrote that
They kept
in.
hitting on that, they did agree, and Ms. Cannon has provided wonderful information at previous school board meetings and workshops on needs for salary increases for substitute pay, for bus drivers, for teachers' aides, and all of those that we are under market, according to the staffing audit that was done.
Yeah,
So
the same,
just keeping that in mind.
so I'm glad you brought up the market analysis, because one of if the 25% of the 30% get 3 and 4% raise, and the 75% of the 30% get 4 and 5, and some maybe 6% raise, then your schedules for assistant principals and teachers that have been tested by TASB every 4 years for the last 20 years are now getting out of line. So we've talked about that from the very beginning, and so, we picked 2%, not by accident, that's because that's less than everybody else is getting. but not enough that it throws your scales completely out of whack. That's why that number was picked. So I just want to make sure that, I think that's a good time to mention that. And they didn't say anywhere in these 315 pages, don't give a raise to administrators, 303 pages. They just said what Ms. Drysdale said, that's just not part of what's gonna be paid for.
It's on
That's right,
us.
It's on the
It's on
district,
us.
it's on the district. Which, by the way, this is further complicated, we have 206 administrators, and that includes 35 counselors. That's right, so.
Because we have
now-
our counselors on our admin.
That's
staff.
right, so that's gonna be
Talking about
complicated.
administrators, that covers a whole lot of territory on the pay scales these days.
Yeah, it's,
Not
well,
just-
it's the people in this room and then 130 other people, right, about, when we pulled out 35 counselors. So it's the purchasing coordinator, and it's the supervisor of the custodians, and it's the supervisor of the transportation department. I mean, that's the biggest bulk of that group. Okay, any questions from the back table on the budget? Good?
I
No
just-
questions. I appreciate your concise recap. I will say, a little disappointed in the selection of date. And we know that both Sturts and SCLO are holding their council meetings today. This seems to be a norm with this district, is that they're very strategic in when you schedule your meetings. You're also very strategic when you schedule your bond votes. So just know that the community's watching that.
Yeah, I just remember a conversation we need to do it the day after the session, so we don't put off those secondary teachers. So that's how today was selected. It was literally the day after this session.
Understood?
Yep, but I hear the feedback, and your feedback is accepted.
Thank you.
I just want to add one more thing on the teacher pay scale, that what is coming out of this. I think as we have looked at the budget this past year a lot, we were struggling to say, yes, we could do a 1%, when, 2% we was like out of, we wouldn't consider that. And this amount of money, we're now looking at 3 or 4 or 5%, which I'm really happy about for the teachers.
Yeah, one little interesting caveat that we just are kind of figuring out. So if it's 30% of the total gain, and the previous chapter 41 district, rich districts, have to count what now they get back in the formula and what is increased, and now they've got to give a raise of 30% of this, and we're gonna get, like our chart, we're gonna fall on our chart. Even with a 4 and 5% raise in comparison, we're gonna fall. Just another unique observation. If this TASBO thing is accurate, now we may get a legislative intent letter that says, nope, that's not what the intent was. But I don't fault TASBO, because everybody right now has to put out, this is what the bill says. They have to report it that way. This is what it says. And then it'll start creating questions, and then we get those clarified with legislative intent letters. Wouldn't that be weird if we give a 5% raise and we fall 3 slots down on the pay scale comparison?
But there's a lot of that built into this, because if you look at the test-based funding, the one for the creates a college, career, and military readiness outcomes bonus, we will fare okay compared to some other districts. And that's another one where your wealthier districts with kids who perform higher are going to get more than others.
I think those 2 or 3 things like that are where Huberty said, if you really dig into this, you can do some pretty cool stuff. You probably heard him say that. I think that's the kind of stuff he's talking about. If we'll take advantage of those things, but we're gonna have to dig in. That's gonna be a lot of work.
Has TEA, have you gotten any word from TEA, Commissioner Morath, as to what kind of guidance and when they will provide guidance for all of that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think that's happening now, and he was, if you notice, he was at the press conference also, and so he's kind of been in lockstep with this whole thing also. So we'll get some guidance from TEA. So I think when there's a legislative intent letter, I think it goes through him to go to the legislators to say we need an answer to I think is the way that's gonna work. So he's gonna say,
Do you
here's.
think it'd be in time for that June 12th meeting that you're talking about?
Well, the only reason I think they may have to hurry is because of what Mr. Finley was talking about, the July 1 districts. So that, like, for them,
Oh,
they've got
I
to
see,
get
I
some
see.
answers now.
Those that have to.
Right. Theoretically, we could, you know, ours could come in July and August, but if they gotta get the answers for the July 1 districts, then we may get them in the next few weeks.
Go back to this, basically, this legislative budget board fiscal note that came out on the 24th after the bill came out. And it actually has language in here, and talks about the salary and teacher retirement system benefits. And I'll just read the first sentence. The bill will require that during any school year for which the basic allotment increases, districts must use at least 30% of the increased per ADA funding for compensation increase for full-time employees of the district who are not administrators.
So that means we have to get the
That's-
answers to all these questions before we
And
can
that's kind of
calculate.
legislative budget board, which I thought was pretty much the gospel as far as what the legislature intended.
That's fine, so there's a lot of things that have to be answered on some of the things y'all were just looking at before we know what the grand total.
Across the board.
Now, the good news is, I've seen it this complicated and we were getting cut. Okay, I mean, so the good news is, at least, you know, there's a gain here. I mean, I've seen it where we've sat here and tried to help out, who's gonna get cut where, but, so I think at the end of the day, you know, there is a gain here. I still wouldn't call it the Super Bowl. Maybe like the Cowboys and Redskins in week 3 or something. Do you wanna do EPP now?
No, we'll go to action items.
Okay, so,
You have the language for the,
it's in the board packet, thank you. What page
Page
was
nine.
it?
Page 9, page 9.
Say it again, please.
Page 9.
9?
can I get a motion for new positions for the 2019-2020 school year presented by Linda Cannon?
I move that the Board of Trustees approve the new positions for the 2019-2020 school year as presented.
A second.
Motion and a second, any discussion?
I'll just throw it out here. And it kind of goes back to, we know we're probably safe for 2019 and 20. Probably are again safe for 2021. The kicker is gonna be fiscal 22 and beyond. And that 2.5 kicks in, it's gonna be interesting to see how, because the only thing we're gonna have is growth plus 2.5. So positions we're bringing on now, they're needed, but the more positions we have, the more we're gonna have to spend on the out years. And those out years could be really dicey, depending on what goes on. So I just want to put that out there, just, we're proving this, we're not gonna prove this tonight, but 2 years from now, we may be wondering how we're gonna pay for it.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion passes unanimously. So, next we will have budget amendment number 7 from the general operating budget, Wayne Kruski.
Yes, the board is asked to consider additional general operating funds in function 11, 12, 13, 21, 23, 31, 33, 34, 36, 41, 52, and 81 in the amount of $2,100,000 for the 2018-19 expenditure projection plan, Part 2, as presented. At this time, the additional $2,100,000 will come from unassigned general operating fund balance as detailed in budget amendment number 7.
Can I get a motion?
Mr. President, I would recommend that the Board of Trustees approve budget amendment number 7 as presented.
I second.
Motion and a second, any discussion?
And we're gonna be buying what? Again, just
So-
put it out there.
The additional
It's on
funds
the list, Dan.
will be used for instructional devices, professional devices, steel artificial turf, security cameras, bus, fine arts instruments.
This was our discussion item at the
Last
board
week.
meeting last week.
Yeah. This is 2.1 million of the 9 million, you know, that's kind of sitting out there.
Yeah, this was the last discussion we had at the last board meeting.
So it's not the whole apple, it's about the apple, but it's one we feel pretty comfortable.
Majority of it's going for instruction code, function 11.
And these are one-time
And then the
buys.
81 facility acquisition and construction.
So I guess my question, like on tech, let's say, the devices and professional devices, so it's getting us basic, not extravagant, just basic needs, basically.
Yes. From the conversations held in our facility team and our EPP team, that conversation fleshed out much of that, to where this is a part of the replacement plan. Because we have some machines, okay, the ages.
So the instructional devices are devices that students use, and the ones that are planned to be replaced were purchased in 2012. They have passed their useful life.
I know we hear all the time that certain school districts around us have one-to-one, and I just want people to know that this is just
This is pretty
needs.
basic.
This
needs.
is not
This is
extravagant. Sadly, we can't provide that because due to money, but this is just needs.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion passes unanimously for some. Next, can we have the,
It's really the same discussion.
Yeah. We just-
You authorize the money.
Yeah, the first. Well,
request for board approval, EPP, general operating budget, Wayne Pruski?
This is just a follow-up. The first item that we just had was for the approval of the money to be used towards. This is now the item for the actual plan of the list of the projects listed there on the back of the action sheet.
Can I get a motion?
I move the Board of Trustees approve items from the SCUCISD expenditure projection plan, EPP, as discussed. Funding for these EPP items provided through the district's fund balance.
Second.
I have a motion and a second, any discussion?
I'm trying to track the numbers here at the bottom of page 13 and the numbers in the middle on the budget amendment. Is that,
Yeah, so the ones on the left on page 12 were just collapsed into the functions. And so some of the devices will be there, some of the, what would be in function 11.
so professional services might be in instructional devices also, that's why.
Correct.
That's
Yeah,
why it's
it gets
9,
bifurcated
98.
depending on which function it goes into. A lot of that is function 36 on this EPP, is that right, Wayne? Or do you do that in 51?
For-
maintenance? Well,
For
just
maintenance?
Turf and,
The turf will be 81.
which is?
Facilities acquisition and
Okay.
construction.
Gotcha, okay.
Turf and the turf match, it's just that there's
The other one.
986 in instruction on the budget amendment and only 7,000.
So there's not a one-to-one correlation between the item and which function it falls in?
Some of those will be instructional devices, and some of the professional devices could also be instructional.
Okay. But they'll be in the correct function because that's what really matters at the end of the day.
Yes, sir.
I was really questioning.
Yes.
Okay. We'll get with the right
You have a
one.
question, Ed?
Two questions. At the end of the day, when all is said and done, we're gonna have about 6,051,000 out of fund balance this year. Is that a correct statement?
Say that again,
Fund
sir?
balance, we're gonna have about 6 million out of fund balance for the year.
We're gonna end with that? Is that
No,
what-
out.
Out.
So you're saying the sped teachers and this expenditure?
I'm just
Like
saying
what
how
we
much
spent
is
this
gonna
year.
come out of fund balance total this year based this plus we've already done before.
We
Is that
did,
the 6
No,
million
so
figure?
we-
it's, I have it, bear with me, sorry. It's been a long day.
What is
Well,
it?
we did the one time for 1.6.
Well, this is the seventh one, so what's the balance of the seventh again? Seventh budget amendment,
That's
right?
the one I'm looking. Here we go.
Yeah, and the, well, I'll leave.
So we did the one, well, some of those were small adjustments, but the big ones were the one-time payment for the employee, that was 1.667. The earlier EPP, early on in the year, the school year, we did 1.6. And then we did some special ed amendments of 600,000. So 3.2 plus 6, so 3.8 coming out.
Well, you've got down here net revenue resources over appropriations, and those uses 3.951 plus 2.1 is 6.051. That's down.
Where you?
Page 12.
Page 12.
Some of that we won't know until we finish the budget year too, right? Because we won't know how much we really pulled
Right.
from it if we have.
As it sits right
Today,
here.
right,
year to
right,
date.
right,
That's all, that's all we
Just
know about
year.
what it sits right here
True.
right now.
Right.
'Cause we don't know what the makeup's gonna be.
And some of those could be absorbed, and we may not actually hit the fund balance. It could be absorbed through budget cleanup at year end. So through all that, we really don't, but what you're saying, yes, that's kind of where if you did it that way, you would see it as fund balance allocations, but then some of those may actually not even have to come out of fund balance.
So just for grins, if the 6 were to come out, that's gonna leave us how much over our 90-day requirement in fund balance?
So-
About 8 million, 7 million?
We would be, we're roughly at about 11 right now, between assigned and unassigned over our
So
general.
maybe if you another 2 out, you're talking about roughly 9, left over, above 90 days. That's the number I was getting to.
Our 90 days is about 30 million, and we would have 11 over that. So take out the 2, we'd be at about 9.
Okay, so 39 after all is said and done, which is 90 over the 90 days mark.
Yes, sir.
That's what I was trying to get to.
So I would just add one, I think that's good, and the exercise of what we just did is great. If we don't, I really think we're going to come back and not say to spend this whole thing in recurring costs until we have this figured out. So that I'm just gonna say that's gonna be for 1 year, that's gonna be another set of money that you could consider for EPP and not go any further into it. Then we get everything ready for 2021 with recurring costs. So I'm just saying that's another set of money to help us attack. And wait, if I may, on the 9 million for this year, y'all are looking at pulling things off for the next bond as best we can, is that right? So that 9 could go down. I can't believe y'all voted.
No, we haven't voted
Okay,
yet.
all right, okay.
Got a motion and motion, second, and a discussion. Any further discussion, questions? Nope. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion passes unanimously.
So let me, that is, I want to make sure that everybody knows that's a different set of money than the money we spent the whole first part of the meeting talking about. So we're working out our fund balance, trying to keep things from breaking down and keep, kids' activities. So I appreciate the fact that the board can, I heard that a lot this week, can we walk and chew gum? And I appreciate the fact that this board can do that. Dwayne, Matt, Scott, I mean, there's a chance we can get this done. Is that right? Before school?
Every time we do it.
So, I had told you something different, but I didn't realize they've got it lined up and ready to go.
Got a plan.
Okay, so that's exciting. There's a lot of good things in there for a lot of student activities across the board. That's the cost of doing business. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn? We're adjourned at 7:09.